All right, we are recording for our famous photographer part 1. So again, this is going to be, originally it was a 3-part project. Now it is a 2-part project due to distance learning. I had to kind of crunch the schedule a bit, so I took out the second middle part. But we'll be doing part 1 first. This will be due at the end of day Tuesday for 50 points. Part 3 will be the photographic part. That'll start on Wednesday of next week, and you have days to shoot for that one. So what I do recommend is go through the instructions, scroll down, and click on the Google Doc at the bottom. I'm just going to make sure you can figure it out in the instructions. The problem is with the instructions, it's not bold, underlined, or can't see the bullet points as well. So you can see it a bit better on the Google Doc. I'm just going to make sure I can share this out. You guys can hopefully access it. It says you can review it. Okay, cool. All right. So what we're going to be doing is researching a famous photographer of your choice. So the key thing is make sure it is a well-known enough photographer that there's been articles or information you can find about them. So again, for part 1, which is due the end of day Tuesday for 50 points, you're going to choose a famous photographer. And again, a famous photographer is one is well known by more than a few people and has published works and books. They also have extensive resume of exhibitions they participated in. Do some research to find a photographer who interests you and one you would like to know more about. The library and the internet are good places to conduct research. Just remember to document your sources. So what you're going to be doing is typing out either a report or a detailed outline on your chosen photographer and include at least 8 of the following information. So there's 14 bullet points here. You're going to answer 8 of them. Which 8 you choose is up to you. Some are easier, some are harder. So it just depends on what you're able to find about your photographer. One thing is you will need to a minimum of 3 documented sources in your report. And so most of you guys are going to be using electronic sources. So I'd use this format here where you copy the link to it, the address, the web address, title of that page or article, the author of that page or article, and then the year is either published or copyrighted. If you scroll down on the document to the bottom, I have an example of what this looks like. So it should have your name, period, name of the photographer you chose, and then your answers to those 8 different bullet points, and then your 3 cited sources, right? So it should look something like this with the link, title of the page, author who wrote it, and the year is either published or copyrighted. So, any questions so far? Just double checking. Okay. So what you're going to be doing is going through these 14 bullet points and figuring out which of the 8 you can actually find the answers to, right? So kind of doing some biographical research. So some of them are easier, some of them are harder. So I'm going to go through them and then you kind of get an idea of what you're looking for. So the first one is pretty easy, is finding the full name of the individual. So not their Instagram handle, the actual photographer's name. Second bullet point is date and place of birth, indicate years of life if they're still living, so when they were born, if they're still alive, or if they're deceased. Education and family background, so talk about where they grew up and what schools did they go to. Next bullet point, why they got into photography, so include job experiences. Maybe they worked at a photo lab or printed photos or assisted another photographer, or maybe they had jobs that kind of led them into the path of photography. How influenced by others in field of photography, so what other photographers influenced them. So a lot of photographers in interviews, when they ask about like who influences your work, right, a lot of photographers will tell you, like, when I started on photography, these photographers were the ones that really influenced my work. I really liked X, Y, and Z about them. How influenced by circumstances in life, or what life experience or surroundings influenced their work, right? So maybe, where they grew up, what around them maybe influenced their photography, why they chose that. If they're like a photojournalist and they're born in like a war-torn country, right? Maybe that surroundings influence, them getting into photography, or circumstances in life affecting them. Have they won any awards or fellowships or grants? So those are usually listed on their site. Typical subject matter of photographs made by this artist. This one's a little easier. What is the subject matter in their photos, right? So depending on which photographer you choose, like if I chose an automobile car photographer, right? He's mostly taking pictures of like supercars or fast cars or hot rods, or you can list the different types of cars they shoot. So what is the typical subjects in their photos? What is the artist trying or has tried to communicate in their photographic work? So some photographers talk about, like, I make photo series about this to express this. I want viewers to get this sort of reaction or understanding about this topic. So they're trying to convey something in their photos. Next one is typical style of work. This one's also kind of easy. You're describing the aesthetic, the look and feel of their photographs. Like, is it very bright and colorful photos? Is it kind of dark and like low contrast and moody, photos? Is it very old, vintage, grainy look, right? So you're describing literally what the photos look like. So think about your elements for our principal design. Is the colors vibrant? Are there bright values, low values, high contrast, low contrast, right? So think about, how is the actual aesthetic of their photos? Next bullet point, have they contributed to the photography or art world? Maybe they've invented something, or how they became a master photographer. So some photographers invented ways of shooting, printing, processing, editing photos, right? What they themselves have said about their works. This would be a quote from your photographer, right? So your photographer talking about their photography or how they shoot, right? So that would be a quote. A lot of times you'll find those in interviews. What others have said about their work. So that would be a quote about someone talking about your photographer. Again, an interview where they're kind of like, oh, I saw you made this photo, right? Or an article written about your photographer, right? Last one is very subjective. It is your opinion of the work and anything else you find important, right? So what stands out about the work to you? Why did you pick them? What about the photography interests you or catches your eye, or you want to see more of it? There's lots of different photographers in the world. Like, why did you choose this one? And then document your 3 sources. So again, sources can come from like internet articles, things written about your photographer. They can also come from YouTube videos, like interviews. If you search on YouTube, there might be an interview with your photographer on YouTube. You can also cite an Instagram article, right? And so I'm going to show an example of kind of how I'd approach doing this myself. But first, I want to show you a couple resources of how to find different photographers to choose from. So if you scroll down, there are some links here of different options of finding different photographers. The first one is a link to Masters of Photography. So these are going to be your very, historical figures in photography. Lots been written about them. A lot of information is there. So I'm sure some of you guys have heard about Ansel Adams. So if you click on Ansel Adams on the left, there's a lot of names here on the left here. You can see links to articles written about him, photographs. You can click on these as examples. You can go, bigger full screen if you want to. And links to resources. So what websites are associated with them, books written about them, right? A lot of good information on this. Again, the Masters of Photography are lots been written about them, but keep in mind, are you going to be able to shoot something similar to them for part 3? So again, part 1, we're researching it. Part 2 was a slideshow that's been canceled because we don't have enough time. But part 3, you're going to actually try to emulate your photographer and do 8 photos shooting similar subjects and editing 5 to have a similar style, a similar look. So kind of keep that in mind. You don't want to just pick a random photographer for this just because you think their photos are cool. Part 3, you're going to be shooting similar subject matter and editing your photos to have a similar look and feel as to your photographer. So another option to find photographers is shotkit.com/photographers. This one is for more contemporary photographers. The cool thing about it is they got photographers listed in different categories like aerial, event, food, photojournalism, street, animal, wildlife, landscape, portrait, travels, sports, wedding, right? Lots of different categories. And so let's say you wanted to see, a car photographer and you wanted to shoot cars for part 3. So I'm going to click on automobile and you'll see other photographers listed here. You can click on that photographer. And what they do at ShotKit is they kind of interview them and ask them about what gear they use when they're shooting, which is pretty cool to kind of understand, okay, they're using these type of cameras and lenses, right? So that's their kind of work setup. And then in the top, you can see examples of their photos. Some cool shots, right, by Seeger and Pierce. Some of them, they'll ask them questions or talk about their work, and then they also give links to their website, right? So that's something I would check out too. So depending on your photographer, what you might want to consider is what, one second, yeah, how much has been written about them? So Nia, what was your question?
It was just about something you said earlier. So if we're gonna choose like older photographers, like people like from the olden times, like if we're gonna choose them, can we like take pictures like they did and just like edit them into like the kind of thing they have? Like, you know how they have like black and white, so we can just edit all of our A pictures into black and white pictures like they did?
So that's what I'll be showing for the next part when we do our photos is there'll be days where I can demo like, okay, let's do like an old vintage Ansel Adams look, right? Let's make it black and white. We can add some film grain. Sometimes we can add like a sepia tint if there's like a little tint to it, just the contrast. And so, yeah, exactly. So, but again, if you choose Ansel Adams, right, he shoots landscapes. So just make sure you think about, do I have access, can I actually go outside and shoot landscapes, right? That you can kind of similar stuff. Good question.
Okay, thank you so much.
Welcome. So for example, like Seagram Pierce, let's search him on Google. So Seagram Pierce photography. And let's see if there's an interview. Oh, there we go. An interview with Seagram Pierce, interview Seagram Pierce, and another interview with Seagram Pierce, right? So this might be a good photographer where we could get good quotes from them, good, things, people talking about them, and maybe good information. And then, I'd search for, is there a biography where I can get biographical info? So there might be some on these. We'd have to kind of dig deeper, but maybe it's in an interview where he talks about, where he grew up. And so what you want to think about, is there enough information about your photographer that you can answer those 8 bullet points, right? Those 8 of the 14 bullet points. And also you can document 3 different sources, right? So something to think about. Another option to find photographers is this list of photographers on Wikipedia. So maybe you're interested in finding a photographer from a certain country, right? So they have this listed by countries. Africa, Asia, Europe, North America, Oceania, South America, right? So maybe you're interested in finding a photographer from Brazil. You can click on Brazil. So most of these on this link are more famous historical photographers, not really contemporary people, but you can click on it and then, you can find information about them. And some of them have good biographical information. Like this has his birthday, he's 26, right? So that's good to know. The other one is I put together a Google Doc of my own list that I put together of photographers to check out. I'm just going to make sure, again, this is shared with you correctly, that you have access to it. So this is something I put together where I found more contemporary photographers that stood out to me in different categories. And I put links to their websites. I'm just going to make sure it's available for everyone. Okay, so you see you have fine art photographers, sports photographers, fashion, architecture, food and product, travel documentary, portraits, lifestyle, landscape, surreal composite, wildlife, nature, wedding, and then link to the masters, link to the automobile photographers and shot kit. So lots of good variety here. So for example, one photographer that's kind of cool is Jeremy Cohort. So I'm just going to click on him and we'll go to his website. So, if I was researching, Jeremy Cohort, you can see he does really kind of cool experimental photography. There's lots of cool edits and different looks on his portraits. He's known for shooting celebrity portraits, a lot of band and musicians, and some kind of cool fashion portraits as well. A really cool variety. Shoots a lot of musicians. He shot like Taylor Swift and kind of all different, famous people. So, if I go to his about page, there's some stuff written about him. He's won different awards. He's been published all over. Talking about other projects he's working on. So if I wanted to use this as a source, I don't see a year or a copyright year, but it does look pretty new and updated. So I would just put 2021 as the year, and then I'd copy and paste the link here. The title would just be, Jeremy Cohort about page. The author, it's not listed, so I'm just going to put him as the author because he's in control of the website, right? And so that's how it kind of, document this as a source. And so let's go to his Instagram so you can check that out. So he does a lot of cool posts. He's actually kind of rebranded his Instagram multiple times, but he has gone through different phases where he kind of cleared everything out and then kind of started over. But some of his posts are very interesting. This one's with Kelly Clarkson, but he's very descriptive. A lot of his photos, so you could quote him in one of these posts. And then what you would want to do is click on these three dots in the upper right, and you can actually copy the link to this post, and that's what you could actually put in your article. So just put the date, this post was on August 23rd, 2020, and then copy the link to it, the title of the post, and then, he would be the author, and then the publisher is the date it was posted, right? So this one was from, let's see, any other famous people here? Some of these people I don't know. Some of them are musicians, and did a lot of cool abstract portraiture stuff. But usually has some comments, And then if you search on YouTube, search Jeremy Cohort interview, and so there might be interviews, on YouTube where people are interviewing him. So this one is a podcast interviewing him. This was a guest interview, right? 20 questions with Jeremy Cohort from B&H. So that's very good. A lot of good information about him in these videos. So again, you just link into the video.
What's your favorite part of your work?
You link in, this is the title of it. The author would be the person who created and published the video. So this would be B&H Photo Video, right? And then the date is published is February 12, 2020, right? So lots of good ways to find, information. It doesn't have to be just from an article. It could be from YouTube video, Instagram post. Just make sure you're copying those links and then citing your sources. All right. Couple more ideas. So again, when you look at the doc, just something to think about is 1, can I answer 8 of these 14 bullet points with, what I'm finding? 2, can I document 3 sources? So it should look something like this, right? Name, period, photographer, answer those 8 bullet points and your 3-sided sources. And then after we turn this in Tuesday night, Wednesday we'll get started on part 3, which is about shooting 8 photos and editing 5 of them to look like their style. So kind of keep that in mind. Don't just pick a photographer because you think they're cool. The main thing people lost points in the fall is people picked sports photographers, and then when it got to the shooting part, they're like, I don't know what to shoot because my mom won't let me outside. I'm like, well, why didn't you think of that? You should have picked a photographer who shot inside, right? Like a food or product photographer. And so really think about what do you have access to for the next part, which is the shooting part, right? Can you shoot similar subjects? Could you shoot, and edit in similar style? So just kind of keep that in mind. Don't just pick a photographer because you think they're cool. Pick a photographer you think like, okay, I can find enough info about them. I can cite 3 sources. I can also shoot and have access to shoot similar stuff. All right. So today I'd kind of spend time thinking about, which photographer, maybe look around at different photographers and really think about, okay, can I find enough info about them? And can I possibly shoot similar stuff about them that they shoot for the next part? All right, I'm just going to stop the recording. And then I will